Now I'd like to talk about short tonguing, which, when I was first learning it back in, boy, I don't know, 40 years ago, I was like, well, longer than that. I was taking lessons with a trumpet teacher, and the story is in my book, and I don't want to go over it. I just want to show how these things should look. But the idea was that he taught cutting off notes with the tongue for staccato, and especially slower staccatos or medium speed staccatos, because it really gave that silence between the notes. In other words, it really gave a cutoff and then a bit of silence and then the next note. And the main reason I stayed with it, and even though my teacher, well, a couple teachers after that wanted me to change doing it, but I stayed with it, and I'm glad I did. And when I finally went to Jacobs for my breathing, which had been ruined by another teacher, um, I he actually is behind this idea with the cutting off the notes of the tongue, and you can read it in the book, one of his books. And the whole point of this, and with my teacher especially, and this is a long time before I met Jacobs, is to have a vowel sound between the two attacks. So if you're going to cut off a note with the tongue, you're going to have an attack at the beginning and an attack at the end, sort of. It's sort of a release attack. Now, here's why we don't want to have, here's why people tell you not to do this kind of tonguing. This kind of thing. It's pretty awful when you do it that way. And I don't even know if I would actually cut those notes off in Mozart anyway. But the thing is that that's awful. And there's another kind of a tongue release that can get you into trouble. And it can be pretty subtle with people. That just sounds like bad tonguing, but if you listen carefully, there's a cutoff with the tongue in there. And we just want to, and it's funny because I was just talking to a high school band director friend of mine, and she was telling me how some of her students got graded down for doing tongue releases, which is that last thing I just did, or any of this. And so you don't want to make it obvious to people this is what you're doing. Of course, it's not musical. It has no use whatsoever, and unless some crazy composer likes it and writes it in. But so we want to do it tastefully, and because our bells are pointing back, and I think as horn players, but this guy was a trumpet teacher, so it really applied to him too. I think as horn players, though, we have to really delineate what we're doing, especially on the short side, because our sound is diffused by going backwards and then out. There could be any kind of acoustical situation off. Sometimes we played on stages where our sound basically went off the stage. There was no help there, and we had conductors going, horns, louder, 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 and we had to tell them, well, until we get in the stage with the shell and the microphones or whatever, it was a Pops concert or something, we're using microphones, not going to hear us too much in this situation. But, okay, I'm going to direct my sound a little bit more right at the microphone. I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of this in a good way. Try just facing backward a little bit more, just the way I'm normally taping this. Let's see how much different there is just from the sound that you hear. Okay, it's kind of a conservative tempo there, but not that conservative. It's just that I wanted to make it clear what was going on. I actually cut off about 13 notes in that little. Some of them are ends of slurs, some of them are just regular notes you can hear pretty clearly. Now, but the secret here, again, is the vowel sound in the middle. We're not going to say tut, 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 tut when we tongue. We're going to say toot, toot, toot. Tot, tot, teet, teet. Whatever it is, we have to have a vowel sound in the middle. So let's just try out a note here. Now, if I I start getting too tight, it's going to start sounding like this. So you can see there's a completely different sound to the note when you put a vowel sound in there. And the length of the vowel sound becomes the length of the staccato. So you can have a longer staccato or a shorter staccato, and it actually has a staccato effect. And this becomes very handy in certain pieces where you need kind of a slow but very powerful staccato without it getting, really ugly. So let's just take a couple of these exercises real quick. They're basically comparison things. Again, we're comparing the volume, we're comparing the airspeed, we're comparing the connection, and we're just changing the pronunciation. So this ST1 starts with a bunch of legato notes, and then we just do a few staccato notes to put them in there. Now, oftentimes, before I do this exercise, I might be just having people try playing on a G like this, an easy note to do this, experimenting a bit with this. But these exercises are all good just in terms of focusing and learning to change back and forth. We really don't want to stop the air at all. And if you hear this effect again, like going down to ST3, if you start hearing the old loud soft thing, or any variation of that, even if it's much louder and then you hear a slight drop off, you really want to learn to keep your tonguing up to the volume of the longer notes around it. Most people are going to feel like they're actually adding air to get that staccato up to the level of the half notes. But actually, I think it's just because we're used to dropping the air when we tongue. And whatever the reason is, the idea here is to get the two equal. All right? Whether it's soft or louder. This starts to sound pretty clinical and maybe kind of over the top, just doing these notes over and over again. But when you hear that vowel sound and the nice bounce of the tongue, now this would be too hard, this would be too tight with the tongue. We want to get these things ironed out before we start trying to play some more musical things, but we want to try to get this right sound for this, and the tone stays the same. But here's what happens when you start getting the tongue too tight and you don't let it bounce and let the vowel sound through. Vowel sound coming through, but it's kind of tight sounding and the tone isn't the same. So you're kind of you got that tongue. We want to keep the air forward. See, that's another thing that I'd just like to explain. The reason I do this, one of the reasons is the pronunciation. I love the way this sounds. I love the control it gives you. But it's the whole idea that if I'm going to teach somebody all the time to keep their throat open, to keep their air going, I'm not going to teach them suddenly, about, I don't know, some little distance into my working with them to suddenly start doing this old glottis staccato thing, tot, 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 which can work, but it's, first of all, a lot of people just don't get that, and if they do, they start doing a lot of funny things with their throat, and then that starts to go down to the air, and pretty soon we've got this whole thing may or may not work for them. Frankly, I don't like the sound of it that much anyway, but so by doing this as a pronunciation rather than as a whole kind of, whatever, bunch of muscles and things going on, just get rid of all that problem. You've got the air up to speed, you've got the tongue just bouncing off it, and you don't have to change. Like we're doing that concert rondo, when you get to the end of that, you start out with a nice staccato, then you get to the legato part, and you're not changing your playing at all. Or if it started with legato and went to staccato, it would be the same thing. So we're looking for that nice resonant sound with a vowel sound in the middle. again here, I want you to breathe before the staccato notes and phrase to the next measure. And with that in mind, it's also playing a good staccato. There's another little pitfall you can run into. It won't change things too much, but sometimes in certain situations it really can. And that is to not rush. Okay? I mean, if you start rushing, the note could be this long. All right? And if you put too many, and it could have that kind of space in between with two of them. But as soon as you start bringing them closer together, and by rushing or kind of jamming them together, they lose the effect of the shortness. Okay? It's a very slight thing, but sort of the same, but it doesn't have the clarity of. All right. So, that's the basic thing with that. You want to start going a little faster with these. Start doing intervals. Again, it's the intervals when we don't get the air through. So we have exercises here for intervals. So we need to keep the air up. Let's see. Let's just take a couple here on ST12, just some thirds. And here we have the legato notes first. Faster. This is really very effective at a slow speed, and it's oftentimes very hard to get those slow speed staccatos, and it's very graceful when you do it right. It has a nice, finished, refined sound, and obviously you can see I'm not making an issue out of it. I'm not, oh, here I am cutting off a note with my tongue. But anyway, if it was good enough for great players like Myron Bloom and Dennis Brain and Alan Civil and a few other people, even today, I think it's good enough for me. I hope it's good enough for you. If you work on it, don't put it in people's faces. And then practice some of these crescendos over here too. And you can hear the difference in quality of the staccato sound. Does that remind you of anything? How about a Brahms symphony where you have to go kind of quarter notes with little carets over them, little accented staccatos? And Mahler, say the Mahler 5, a lot of this in Mahler. He often writes Keck, over the notes. And you can make it even more than that if you want. I'm just trying not to set a bad example that I'm going to have out to thousands of people and say, well, this guy really just overdoes it. All right, but the point is that you can do this any way you want. It gives you control. And so you can have, like the concert rondo there, you have that opportunity. Now, another great place to do this is on the beginning of To Eulenspiegel. You want that little mischievous kind of manic sound at the beginning there where the solo is a 7/8 note melody over a 6/8 beat. It's just, crooked, little strange. And we want to start this out soft. We don't want this effect. Or we don't want this effect. Which is sort of kind of neither fish nor fowl. So we need a kind of a coy, mischievous sound here. Okay, so it has that quality to it, a very live and sparkling kind of sound to it. All right. Um, I think, that's about all I want to talk about the short tonguing right now. I think it's something that you can experiment with. Sometimes you might want to cut off the end of the note with it, but just remember you have the option of, it's called tongue shading to some people. I think I used that term in the book. It's basically, as Jacobs would say, your tongue is a tool to just shade the attacks. And we talked about the air attack thing. Um, the tongue isn't needed for an attack, but it certainly gives the exact quality you want to the attack. So that's important to realize. And by pronouncing, like we talk, we pronounce. We don't go like this to make a short sound with our speech, right? We cut off with consonants. So there's just an infinite variety of this.